So, good morning or good night, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to a new episode of Chilling with a Book, where I talk about a book that I've read, and I'm kind of cheating here. I didn't read it, I heard the audiobook, but that counts, right? I'm counting it as reading. So, the book that I'm going to talk about, it was just like released a few months ago, and it's none other than the book for Mark Hoppus from Blink 182, and it's a memoir, and it's called Fahrenheit 182. And here's the album cover. So I just finished this book. I'm recording this, and I just finished listening to the audiobook literally like 10 minutes ago. So I have it like real fresh in my memory. I listened to it like this week, and I was able to finish it. The audiobook, I think, is like 7 or maybe 8 hours of listening. So there was a few days that I could listen to it. And so yeah, this is the album cover. And yeah, Mark Hoppus has done some interviews about this, and you may heard some funny stories from the book, but the origin of this book. So Mark decided to do this book when he got his cancer lymphoma like diagnosis, and the doctors or someone, I think a psychologist, told him that it would be cool to write some thoughts and start a memoir. So he did that, and that led to doing a full memoir about his life. So the album touches everything from his youth, how he formed Blink 182, how he met Tom, the breakups, everything is covered on this album, no, on this book. And something really good about this book is like I think Mark Hoppus' sense of humor comes through. Maybe it comes through because I listened to the audiobook, and basically Mark Hoppus is talking, he's doing his own book, reading it. So I think that's why his sense of humor might land in an audiobook. But I think if you read this book, not as an audio form, it will also like it will come through. So the book starts in his childhood and how his parents, they got divorced and he moved a lot. But the book, he never talks about like drugs or hard drugs or anything like that. He doesn't think that that was part of his persona. He talks like he was obsessed with bands like growing up, especially The Cure, which it comes up later on in the book. And he also talks like how he starts, like he had a love for punk music, and that's when he like begged his father for a bass. At first, when their fathers divorced, he lived with his mother, then they had to choose, and then he went with the dad. So he talks about abusive relationships that his mother had. Then he talks also about, the relationship his father had with him and women and how that shaped him. So when they start to talk about Blink, it's pretty interesting, like how they talk about like playing a show in a biker spot where like nobody came, but they were just happy that they had like a real show to play for. He mentions how he like met Tom, who was younger than him, and they bonded. They had the same sense of humor, and they became like instant friends. Uh, then they go from when they released their first like the Buddha CD, or at that time it was a demo. Then Cheshire Cat, and then they go when they started like getting more big. So their first big show was a local punk rock venue in San Diego. So at first they placed the dungeon. So like they say in the book, Mark is reading that if they got more than 100 people come, if they ask them who are you here to see, and if they say Blink 182, or like the band who won, got to play off stage, and they won. They also talk like how they first were named Blink, but because there was like an electronic band, I believe somewhere in Europe, they had to change, and they changed it to Blink 182 of before they were named Duct Tape, which I thought was interesting. Uh, Mark Hoppus talks a lot about like how when they did Dude Ranch and started getting like more success, he talks about like songs that I love, like Josie, which is a song from Dude Ranch that's really cool. And then they talk about a few chapters talking about the album that broke them, Enema of the State. There's a part on the book where he talks about before Enema of the State came out, they were doing the American Pie movie, and they asked them to do a song for that one, but they ended up being in the movie. I remember when I saw that movie in the movie theater, and they're in the part where like one of the main characters is about to hook up with the exchange student, and they broadcast it over the internet. And that's the part where Blink 182 is. And yeah, it's funny. He talks about how he had to drive like hours to do like it was like a 30-second scene, but Mark Hoppus improvised. So it's a cool story, and I do remember watching that movie back in the day. And I was already into Blink 182. I got to them right when they released Dude Ranch. That was the first album from them that I bought, and I got into them. And of course, Enema of the State, I have it right here on vinyl. You have to have this album on vinyl. It's a classic. I have it, and of course, we're not here to talk about this, but obviously Mark talks about like having this cover, and they talk about like the first ideas for doing music videos. So the first music video they did was "What's My Age Again," and they got a director who had the idea of like you guys running around naked. And he says that at the time, for a long time, they were like, no, now we're going to be known as that naked band. But they loved it, and it's a classic music video. Of course, they talk about all the small things and how everyone thought it was funny because they were parodying like the pop stars of that era, like the Christina Aguilera's, 98 Degrees, Backstreet Boys, In Sync. But Mark actually didn't find it that it was funny, and he didn't get it. But he says in the book, boy, was I wrong, because obviously all the small things was a huge hit for the band, and even bigger than What's My Age Again. Then they talk about like they had a serious song on that album, Adam Song. And Mark actually wrote that one because he was feeling kind of depressed and lonely, and he wrote that for himself. He didn't think it was going to be a part of Blink 182, but it became a part of Blink 182. In the book, there's also like a funny story of like when he went to play to a party, and he, by mistake, he was given acid or something, and he was losing it. And there's some humor in the book as well. So after Enema of the State, they talk about a lot about like how they had to feel a little pressure to top that one. And the next album, which Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, he talks about how they had the album, but the label was like, I don't know, guys, there's no singles here. And like Mark Hoppus and Tom DeLonge took it like very seriously and were like kind of pissed off. And Mark went ahead and wrote the rock show, and Tom wrote First Day, and they became huge hits. And then he says like, yeah, I didn't want them on the album because we didn't want to only be known like a joke band or like party band, but those hits helped catapult the album. Then he goes on when they do like the self-title, and that's when like things started to fall apart before Blink 182. The relationship of Mark and Tom, they talk about that, how Tom went with Travis and they formed Boxcar Racer, which Mark took it really hard because he was like, this sounds something like Blink, but I'm not in it. So they go on that, and then they go off like when they just decided, Tom quit the band for the first time, and Mark talks about his other band that he did at that time with Travis, Plus 44, which I actually bought their album when it came out, and I thought it was really fucking good. So he talks about that and how they had to go from playing like big stadiums to like smaller stuff. So that part's interesting as well. They also talk about a tour that they did with Green Day, and at that moment, Green Day was opening for them, and there was like a lot of tension and rivalry between Green Day and Blink 182 at that time. That was previous to Green Day putting out American Idiot, which got Green Day up again in the charts. So they talk about that. He talks about trivial things like being on a date with, I think it's Melissa Joan Hart, I believe it was, and how they didn't have anything in common. So yeah, he talks briefly about that. I saw some interviews where they were saying that he talked bad about her, but not really. When I listened to the audiobook, I didn't think that there was nothing like out of the ordinary that he said. So that's in there. And then after Plus 44, they go back again. Like, he talks about like when Tom then did Angels and Airwaves and how the relationship got strained. But then they came back again and they did that Neighborhoods album, which I think is a very underrated Blink 182 album. Mark talks about like how that album, even though they thought it was great, they had to produce themselves because also they talk a lot about like working with Jerry Finn, and also when Jerry Finn died, and all that sadness that happened because he produced some of their most successful albums. So that album, Neighborhoods, like Mark says that the tours were not that great, they were miserable, and then again, the band breaks up again. And the first time that they broke up, they didn't do Blink 182 because they thought that they couldn't do it with Tom. So the second time that they broke up, Mark and Travis were like, fuck you, Tom, and we are going to keep at it. And then they talk about getting Matt Skiba, doing the California album, which I think, we covered on my series, Isn't That Bad? And I actually think that album has some solid songs in there. And he goes all into that. He talks about, there's a very funny story in this. Probably the funny story on this book has to do with Robert Smith from The Cure. So apparently, Blink 182 was playing somewhere, and Robert Smith like did a song with them. And at the end of the night, apparently Robert Smith was taking something, and he tried to make out with Mark Hoppus in front of his wife. And then he's like, "Did this happen? Didn't this happen? Like, I should have let him kiss me, but he didn't kiss me." And I thought it was a very funny story. And they say, don't meet your heroes, they might kiss you. So, but come on, it's kind of funny. Like, he was going to be kissed by Robert Smith. That's very goth. So that's like the funniest part of the story. Then obviously he talks about the cancer and how he got he found out it was a little bit into the pandemic. He talks also about like living in London for 3 years. But when he discovered that, and then they discovered he was cancer, in the book, there's a few chapters about his whole cancer journey. It was 18 months that he had to go through some chemotherapy, and he lost all his hair, and he talks about like how bad he was feeling. But he also says that the day he got the cancer diagnosis, Tom texted him with a picture, and he said that he had cancer, and that kind of like renewed them talking back to each other, and they became best friends again. I like it that he talks about the cancer, and he even has like a little, even though he was scared and he was in pain, he kept like his Mark Hoppus like sense of humor when I was listening to this audiobook. So he remained kind of positive, because he also talks about being OCD and how that affected a lot of his life. And before he talks about cancer, he talks about like he was experiencing a lot of like death near him, like plane crashes, including the plane crash that Travis Barker was in. And also, there's a very poignant story in this book. So Mark Hoppus, he does scuba diving. So he was doing scuba diving somewhere in California. And you know, when I scuba dive myself, you can't do it alone. They always assign you a buddy, so you take care of each other. So they assigned him a woman he met that day, and they went down, and there was some part there were some like kelp, and all of a sudden he lost the woman. He couldn't see her, and you're supposed to go and see if she surfaced and then go down again. And 2 hours passed and they didn't find her. And at the end, you know, the dive masters have to go. And unfortunately, this woman had caught in the, you know, the big seaweed, and she lost her mouthpiece and actually and drowned and panicked and drowned. So he talks about like having that experience, like even though he knew this woman for like 2 or 3 hours, really staying with you. So I thought that was a, you know, it's a sad story, but I think it's something to that you think like he's trying to put that in the story because this is before he is battling for his own life with the cancer diagnosis. So uh, the chapters about cancer, he talks about how like they were like how like he felt so weak and like what he was feeling, and he there's some kind like he writes some there's some journal parts that he reads in the book that obviously I'm not going to spoil because they're pretty interesting, and I think you need to read them yourself or listen to them. And at the end, you know, the book goes when he finally is cancer free, and the first thing he did was get drunk, and after that he had to, you know, he had to learn to re-sing because the chemotherapy had affected his vocal cords, and he had to relearn to play the bass. And the book ends with Blink 182 reuniting, and the last chapter of the book is when they played that awesome show in Coachella, and when Blink announced that they were back. So I think you know I enjoyed the book. I think the book, you know, if you like biographies, you will enjoy this book. Uh, it was more of a lighter read than the last audiobook that I listened to, which was the Psalm 41. I thought that one has some very harsh stories. This one, I knew the cancer was going to be in there, and so besides that, there's other parts of this book that are more lighthearted, and he talks about different things, and you can always tell that Mark Hoppus has like a good sense of humor to things. So yeah, if you're a Blink 182 fan, I would recommend you buy the book or listen to the book. It's pretty entertaining. So I want to see what I'm going to hear next to talk about in Chilling with a Book. So until next time, couchers, the sector, the shield on the couch, and I'll see you all right here on the couch. Thank you and goodbye.